So again, I'm Rick Harnish. I'm the executive director of the um, High Speed Rail Alliance. We are a nonprofit um, focused on education. We strive to be the most knowledgeable independent source of what high-speed rail is, why we should build it, and what our leaders at our state capitals and in Washington, D.C. can help to make it happen. And then we provide the tools folks need in order to communicate and educate their local leaders. I have a presentation to go through to kind of guide the conversation, and we'll go from there. And Dana, we will talk about Connect US in a little bit. So I've been giving, 5 to 7 Rotary Club presentations a week since January. I want to thank our board member, Bill Porter, for getting these set up. It's been very helpful for a couple of reasons. One, it's clear that these have been focused mainly at this point in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan. We're happy to schedule one anywhere in the country. I would really like, for those who might know folks in California, I'd really like in the next month to be able to do some presentations in California, because there's a critical decision that they need to make basically in May. So if folks can help us get those presentations. But I always start with a slide, this picture of the Acela train, and point out that it is the fastest train in North America. It does demonstrate that Americans will ride the train in large numbers. And it's interesting because, they have, prior to COVID, charged what I think to be very high fares. We would like to see much lower fares, but it demonstrates that is really because they just don't have enough seats. And if we could make the trains longer, make them more frequent, make them faster, we believe that they could charge lower fares and actually serve a lot more people and be better off financially in the process. But we do have something to build on in the Acela, and we need to really amp it up. And I covered this already. Our 3 programs, or our 3 kind of interrelated areas of work, are research, again, being very knowledgeable and an independent source, and that's important. There are a number of people who really know how to make this happen in the States, but they work for consulting firms and they don't give away that knowledge for free. We're a source that people can access at any point. Our primary function is to educate people through Rotary Club presentations and et cetera. And then we provide the tools that people need in order to educate folks, educate their leaders, both at the local, state, and federal levels. Our big picture vision or goal is we want a big federal program, and we'll talk about big later. But if you look through history, big federal programs are national. And I believe that the advocacy community has made a big mistake in talking about high-speed rail as big city to big city, 100 to 300 mile trips. Certainly, high-speed trains shine in that market. France has been running Paris to Marseille, which is 500 miles in roughly 3 hours for 2 decades now. Clearly, it's a very well-used system. It's got the majority of the market share. That's fantastic. But passenger trains can do much more than that. And in fact, the TGV has impacted hundreds and hundreds of stations throughout France because of the fact that the TGV uses both high-speed lines and shared use lines, and the connecting services are much better off because they bring so much volume. So in order for us to get success politically and on a business case, we really need to think about 49 states. And to clarify the question that was asked in a YouTube video after last week's presentation, I'm not suggesting Alaska should have high-speed rail, but the Alaska Railroad should be faster and more frequent, and should be continued to be invested in. And then I joke, but Hawaii and Puerto Rico both have interstate highways, so perhaps it needs to be 50 states. We need to be very optimistic. We need to assume that we are going to be successful. A lot of planning around high-speed rail is actually assumed that success isn't possible, but we need to say that that success is possible. We need to have long-term vision for, again, a big national program that combines. So we need to have that big long-term vision, but also think of things that we could win quickly. And we need to combine key segments of high-speed line where the trains are going 200 miles an hour with a lot of feeder lines that are going 80 to 90 miles an hour on tracks shared with freight trains. And because of that, one thing that really has to change if we're going to have successful passenger rail in this country is we have to make this a good business case for the privately owned railroads. Again, a major failing has been, was set up for us with the idea that Amtrak would pay incremental costs for the use of the railroads. That has set up an argument that has happened now for 50 years between the railroads and Amtrak. We need to get to the point where the railroads are treated as a vendor and they make a profit running those trains the same way that defense contractors make a profit and highway builders make a profit. And Jim will get to California in a little bit. So we don't see this as a standalone system. We see this as a series of building blocks that can be assembled in different ways depending upon what the local market is and what the existing assets are. In my view, for the most part, we need to assume that if you want to go faster than 90 miles an hour, you have to separate passenger and freight. If you want to go faster than 110, you have to separate the roads from the tracks so that people don't drive in front of the trains. A good idea no matter what. For 150 or 125 miles an hour, you need to have electrified tracks. Fencing's always a good idea. And the track is pretty much the same, which gives you the advantage of a high-speed train that can go 180 miles an hour on a high-speed line can also go on shared use tracks with freight trains at 80 miles an hour, which allows us to think about phasing in a much different way than we have thought about in this country. And then to go faster than 160, you probably need to build a completely new railroad, just like they did between Milan and Bologna. So you've got the old line with frequent passenger trains making a lot of stops and freight tracks over to the east. And then you've got this new line going 205 miles an hour alongside the autostrada. So to simplify it, we've broken this down into 3 categories: shared use lines, where you're going no faster than 90 probably on privately owned freight tracks shared with heavy freight trains; regional lines where it's probably publicly owned and really focused on frequent passenger trains; and then high-speed lines where you're building new tracks to go 186 miles an hour or above. In order to understand how these fit together, you really need an integrated plan. Most of our planning in this country has been done quarter by quarter, and you can't build a strong enough business case on a quarter by quarter basis. And then we really need to think about replacing everything in the fleet, whether it's commuter trains that are older than 10 or 15 years. And we've got a lot of old commuter trains, and replacing the entire Amtrak fleet, except for the new Acellas that are on the way, and the new trains that are will soon be ordered. And there's a number of manufacturers that can do that to help get us there. So these pieces can be put together again in different ways. with high-speed lines, the new 200-mile-an-hour high-speed lines going from major city to major city, regional lines either providing the access into the city or perhaps serving a string of smaller communities along the way, and a lot of shared use lines, and then buses filling the gaps. We've started creating state-by-state visions of what this could look like. We've done Wisconsin, Illinois, and Michigan, and the state of California is the first state to do this at an official level. This is our vision for Wisconsin, with a new high-speed line linking Chicago to St. Paul in 2.5 hours to 3 hours, working with the freight railroads for Green Bay, along the river, etc. And then those existing bus lines, because you're bringing a lot more volume into the system, the bus lines then can run more frequent service, which provides better access even between each other in those rural communities. Very difficult to do that kind of thing at the federal level. So what we've done so far is say, these are the super important lines for both freight and passenger. We assembled this from various different sources. So, you know, there really needs to be a high level of investment, probably in electrification, and really amping up the speeds even for the freight trains for the points where you're entering true high-speed rail. And there really should be an aggressive program, at least east of Kansas City, Minnesota, for linking cities with 200 miles an hour and above. The purple lines on this map represent serious planning work, or actually construction on one segment of lines going faster than 186. I will point out that only for scale purposes, Baltimore to Washington, we had a proposal last week on the maglev. And Beth is asking a question about battery locomotives. There isn't enough storage to really do that practically yet, instead of having overhead catenary. There are some tests underway, but it hasn't been proven yet. And then yellow is not where we think there should be regional service. It's where there's some interesting examples of regional service that we can draw on and discuss as we move forward. So one of the missing pieces here is a national plan. And these next two maps really demonstrate that. So in the 90s, there was a program where states could ask to be included as and get designated high-speed corridors. It really was not planned out in any way. It was basically the states who fought the hardest. So you've got these disjointed proposals here, official high-speed rail corridors, but they're disjointed. And immediately you can see some gaps: Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Louisville to Atlanta. So that's kind of the first step along the way. The next step is the Federal Railroad Administration has done regional plans. And these again are disjointed, but at least the Southeast and the Midwest connect at Nashville. And, you know, since today you can take a high-speed train from Beijing to Hong Kong, which is Chicago to Miami. You can take incredibly frequent service, at least every hour, from Beijing to Shanghai, that's Chicago to New York, and Chicago to Atlanta. We really should be thinking on that scale. But we have had substantial progress in planning, and something we can build upon. And then Daniel is pointing out that Europe is reintroducing night trains. And certainly, I believe that that's one way that we could start providing service quickly on the existing network and start building a culture of passenger rail ridership throughout the country. And we're glad that Amtrak has finally, in the past year, made an official request to replace the sleeper train fleet, which should have been replaced decades ago. But we're glad that they are asking for that. The next step along the line is Amtrak has been, over the last 2 or 3 years, doing a proposal for expanded service. This is it, what they've proposed for expanded service, with the dark blue being existing routes of one nature or another, yellow being improved existing routes, and blue being new service. Love the map, excited about it. They did a good job of tying this to the Biden's proposal for expanding service. We're glad that they're taking initiative to come up with an expansion program. Would like to see them talking about faster trains and more frequent trains than they are. But it's a really good starting point. And we think that this should be funded along with programs for the states to be much more aggressive than what Amtrak is proposing. So that's kind of where we are on the national scale in terms of what planning has been done. There's a couple of good examples to draw from. So that Amtrak map, in the next couple of weeks, and you go to our events page, we'll have Derek James from Amtrak talking about their thinking around that map. Very much looking forward to that. Brightline was the Florida and Las Vegas proposals. We had a brief overview of that you can look at in the past on our events page. Texas Central is a really exciting project, and the Baltimore Maglev. And then we'll have in the future more detail on the Northeast Corridor and Cascadia. But today, I want to talk more detail about California, I'm sorry, Dana said that the Connect US map in the West is disconnected from local advocacy efforts. I can see your point. And again, Amtrak will be talking about it in about another week or so, 2 weeks, I'm sorry. So I want to go over real quickly about California. And next week, I'll go into much more detail of the decisions they need to make this year that are critical to the national discussion on high-speed rail. But a real quick overview, because California really has exciting stories to tell, not just about high-speed rail, but it's the framework that we should be doing nationally. So in 1990, the voters approved a big transportation program that included a lot of highways, but also included a massive expansion for transit service and for Amtrak service statewide. And that laid the foundation for talking about high-speed rail. They also started high-speed rail planning in the 90s, but a key turning point in California was this voter-approved initiative to expand Amtrak service and commuter rail across the state that happened in 1990. So if we had done that in the Midwest, there would already be 16 trains a day to Milwaukee. There'd be 5 trains or 7 trains a day to Green Bay, 12 to 16 trains to Detroit. That's the service they already have on Amtrak there. And this is a picture of my son and I about to get on an Amtrak train from Oceanside to LA several years ago. The next piece they did, so that started a massive expansion throughout the state. The next piece that they did was the voters approved building a 220-mile-an-hour high-speed line from LA to San Francisco. And that is still the plan, and it is still under construction. And this is a bridge being constructed in Fresno. It's actually been finished, but this is the newest construction picture that we've been able to find that fits this format. But that's exciting that they actually have the first high-speed line under construction. And then the next innovation, which is critical, and is what we need to start getting to state by state, region by region, and then at a national level, at different layers and different levels of detail at each of those, is they had a challenge because all of these expansion programs were being directed by individual agencies and not very well connected. So in 2018, they brought them all together and they actually went to the detail of creating a timetable for 2040 with, and this is a visual representation of the frequencies that would exist and speed levels that would exist under that timetable. And that at each of those squares, everything is timed to meet there at the same time so that you can easily connect, with all of the stations being designed so that you can easily connect. And then the key piece being one ticket for the entire trip, no matter how many legs of this journey you're taking. This was transformative. They're the first state to do this. As far as I know, they're the third region to do it, the other being Switzerland and Germany. And we really need to start thinking this way, and you create a much better political case and much better business case for each segment if you do this. So here we've got their base case of 2010. This is a list of counties from north to south, and this is rail or Amtrak bus ridership in between those counties. And I want to point out here, by many standards, the Fresno Amtrak station is very busy, but it doesn't show up on this scale. So if they continued with everything that's in process and did it in a disjointed way, you'd have an incredible growth of ridership, fantastic. But if you spent a little bit more, just a little bit, and coordinated the whole thing, you have a tenfold increase over the base case. And plus, you're driving a lot more ridership in rural communities. Again, a bigger political base, and because each segment is hauling many more people, a stronger business case. So that's why we need regional plans instead of corridor by corridor plans. And we really need to amp up the planning in order to do that. Real quick, again, if you want more detail on this, in a week and a half, I'll be giving a lot more detail. We'll have some new graphics by then. It'll be a little bit more understandable. But the key thing to know is, in our new vocabulary of high-speed line, regional line, and shared use line, the gray here is existing shared use, and the dashed is proposed shared use. Each color is a proposed segment of either regional or high-speed line. And so right now today, the most exciting combined project, commuter rail project in the country is under construction right now. They just had a major stepping stone open yesterday. A new grade crossing and train station in San Mateo is part of this. So they are completely reconstructing, or they're upgrading, I'm sorry, San Francisco to San Jose for 110-mile-an-hour commuter trains with the latest safety standards, which are safer and less expensive to operate than American safety standards for train design. 15 minutes headways will run on that service. That's under construction today, and that's designed to be shared, both these 110-mile-an-hour commuter trains and high-speed trains. Under construction, they're about to wrap up on environmental approvals for Merced to San Jose, the difficult crossing over Pacheco Pass. And they're about to wrap up the crossing over the Tehachapi Pass, down the Antelope Valley, and then building a regional line like San Francisco between Anaheim and Burbank. That planning work and environmental approvals is almost done. How exciting is that? The environmental work is almost done for San Francisco to Anaheim. Initial planning work is underway up to Sacramento, and then San Diego, that discussion needs to start. And then you've actually got a new high-speed line that's ready to go to construction. Hopefully construction will start this year on San Francisco to Victorville. All of the design work and getting that through all the government hurdles was actually financed by a casino in Las Vegas. Brightline has bought that from that casino owner, essentially. That's not quite true, but to simplify it. And then they're starting the design work to get down the Cajon Pass, and the final environmental is expected to be done in the next month or next months to Victorville. So it's an exciting program that's well underway. This is under construction here, this piece, and then they have enough state money authorized to build from Merced to Bakersfield. And the key decision this spring is whether the state releases that money. The money was approved in 2008 by the voters. There's another $4.1 billion that needs to be finally released in order to continue construction. That's the key decision the legislature is going to make this year. Our members in California are working very aggressively to ensure that they get the word that this is a game changer to build from Bakersfield to Merced. Lots of folks don't understand these are pretty big cities. Already there's a very large rail ridership going from Stockton, Merced, and Fresno and Bakersfield down to Los Angeles, even though it's a bus connection. Big market coming up this way. And there's still a decent market coming from the San Joaquin Valley and taking a bus over to Las Vegas. So that's an existing base that's really good. And when they open that high-speed line between Merced and Bakersfield, it completely transforms the existing network. So the green dash lines are existing Amtrak buses that see vastly improved frequencies once the high-speed line opens. You've got the Brightline will be open by the time this is open. So you'll have much expanded bus service here, 18 buses a day down into the Las Vegas basin. And you'll go from 7 trains a day on this segment at 3 hours to 18 trains a day at an hour and a half. And then 18 trains a day on these 3 routes. They'll split into 3 different directions. And because of that, the ridership will more than double, the revenue will more than double, and the actual cost of running the system, even though you're running more trains and buses, the cost that the state has to pay to run it actually goes down. So this is exciting. This is the kind of discussion we need to be having state by state, region by region, to think bigger so that each segment of it can be bigger than what you get if you just plan it individually. So that's like what we want. We want the states to do these kinds of plans. We want them to be aggressive on building the infrastructure. We want California to go much faster than it's going, much faster than it's going. And they did make some mistakes at the beginning. I'm confident that they have got that underway. They've got a good plan. And the answer to get it moving faster is more money. So how do we get more money for all of these? Well, I want to talk real quickly, and Eric Peterson, I want to agree with you. 1C travel would be much better, but we need to do this segmented, and unfortunately that LA to Bakersfield piece is the hardest piece. So at a federal level, there are these existing or proposed programs. And again, I think that one of the mistakes we made as a country was to separate funding for freight rail, commuter rail, and long distance. And in this case, long distance is anything that's not commuter. We made a huge mistake in doing that. And so you've got, even though railroad infrastructure is basically shared and interconnected, you've got these different programs. And it's kind of crazy how Caltrain has a piece of federal transit money, a piece of federal high-speed rail money, a piece of state high-speed rail money, a piece of state transit money. It's nuts, right? But that's what we've got to work with. So you've got the transit program, you've got national network, etc. So I listed these out to kind of clarify, talk a little bit in these more. And there's a couple of good questions that I'll get to in the end. And Larry, on the California, the key mistake on California was they didn't have the right-of-way and planning wrapped up when they started construction. But they had to do that because there was a date certain to spending the money. But I think a lot of the blame goes back to Governor Schwarzenegger. He should have ramped up the planning work then. And I think that was the key mistake, was not spending enough on planning under the Schwarzenegger administration. Okay, so we've got these programs. Transit is the big one. It includes both railroads and buses. Amtrak is split into 2 separate programs. CRISI is actually key, because CRISI, you can do anything we need to do. You can build railroad bridges for any speed. Everything you need to do to build high-speed rail or to build a shared use line, you can do through the CRISI program. But it's a competitive program that anybody can put in an application for. The State of Good Repair program was actually targeted at the Northeast Corridor, but others have used it. The Restoration and Enhancement grants was targeted at New Orleans to Mobile, but that's useful for getting Amtrak service started. Grade crossing separation, it would be good to have a program to just start separating grade crossings, pick off the most dangerous ones. Prime is a new program proposed by Congressman DeFazio. It made it through the House last year. I have to admit, I'm not sure why he's proposing a new program. The high-speed rail corridor development program was what most of the money went through for the 2009 and 2010 funds. And then planning and technical development also were part of that and haven't moved forward. In that planning piece is that plan that we talked about, right? So there's a couple of bills that have been introduced. A quick overview to go through the key ones. So Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal from Connecticut, and I hope I have that right, has proposed creating a trust fund for Amtrak that would fund them at just shy of $5.5 million, not $5.5 dollars, $5.5 billion per year. So that's a good step in the right direction. That allows Amtrak to start planning, or to plan better. The High-Speed Rail Corridor Development Act and that is both an authorization because it's creating a new program through creating the trust fund, and it's an appropriation because it actually commits to spending the money over 5 years. So I meant to explain, authorizations are basically creating the program, and then appropriations are spending towards those programs. You don't have to do it that way. A lot of times they appropriate programs that aren't authorized, and Tiger/Build is one of those. Sometimes they authorize programs that we never spend money for. You've got authorization is Representative Costa from Fresno has basically suggested putting, reauthorizing the development program at $8 billion a year. That's great. Moulton has done the best so far, by far, to really think about what policies we need and what levels of spending. We're glad he's reintroduced that proposal as the American High-Speed Rail Act. We are excited about this. And again, I found another typo here. It does not create 2 new programs. I want to be clear on that. I had that wrong when I put the slide together. What it does is it defines high-speed rail as 186 and above, and it creates a real emphasis on building those high-speed lines, and then has a secondary emphasis on building what we would call regional lines or shared use lines. And you can get a lot more mileage out of one than the other, but you get a lot more value out of focusing on high-speed rail. And then authorizes that program at $41 billion. And then it makes substantial policy changes too big to list here. So that's really exciting. And there's some good questions in here that, again, I think we'll get towards the end first. And then President Biden has proposed a supplemental appropriation. And I've been told they envision this as in addition to whatever is decided for the reauthorization and the ongoing. Makes things very confusing, I admit, but he's proposed a supplemental appropriation that would actually run over 8 years, and it did. And again, in addition to whatever else is out there, I'm a little confused, but for sure it's 85 billion for transit, and then basically 10 billion split between the Northeast Corridor, the national network, competitive grants, and for freight and safety. I assume those don't add because of rounding errors, and I could not find detail on specifically what programs those would go into. So here's a table of, and again, I want to emphasize, I could be very wrong, but getting the discussion going to kind of clarifying where we're at with the different proposals. Moulton takes the existing, and again, this is a typo, the existing program that hasn't been appropriated for a decade, and really amping that up. Really excited about that. Would be very happy about the numbers that Biden and Blumenthal are talking about Amtrak. DeFazio's got a decent number in there for Chrissy. Amtrak has the advantage, a key advantage of they can operate in any state and coordinate across state lines, and they can get this money out the door faster. So I would really amp up the Amtrak money the way that they're talking, maybe even a little bit more, but also put a lot of money into Chrissy and the high-speed rail programs, so that Amtrak is bringing the initial, let's get stuff going, those initial wins, let's make it happen. And then the states and Amtrak can work together, states independently, private companies, to really build on those initial wins. And we really need to amp up that planning and development of the technical issues. So unfortunately, however much you would like to just go to Europe and buy stuff off the shelf, you can't quite do it. And signaling some issues, and there's some issues on how do you interact with our ridiculously long 3-mile long freight trains. We really need to amp up the technical planning for that. So we've got some good discussion going. Not quite ready for this shirt, but let me get to some questions. And then we'll come back to what you can do to help. So let me see what questions have come in, and then I'll get back to how you can help. Uh, so Dana, you had asked about how people are reacting to the Amtrak plan. I've been very encouraged about the fact that it seems to have generated a lot of excitement. And we want to build on that and really amp up that excitement. The fact that Newsom is going to be potentially might be vote on a recall for Newsom certainly complicates matters, but we shouldn't focus on it. Atlanta, somebody's asking about Biden's infrastructure plan. What chance is there for Atlanta, Orlando, Tampa Bay? And the answer is, how aggressive will Florida and Georgia and the cities that will be linked by that, how aggressive are they willing to be to fight for that money and to provide matching funds? So that's, if any of these go through, it's really up to states and local municipalities to fight to make it happen, because the money we're talking about still isn't enough. So we've got to get the state legislators amped up. We talked about night trains. That's a good way to get the culture of riding trains moving. Thank you, David, for the new maps. Congratulations on the new maps. Jim, you're actually right. Absolutely right. Long Island is testing out battery operated trams on their Oyster Bay branch. We're excited that people are testing that. Metro is proposing a test here too. Richard is asking about the new Acela trains coming online. No date has been announced, but hopefully in the next 1 or 2 years. And John is saying California high-speed rail is estimated to cost $80 billion for the full end-to-end, and it's taking longer than envisioned. I'm sorry, we don't have an estimate on the national network, and how you streamline the process and reduce costs. And the most important thing is make sure the plans are solid at the beginning and there's strong community outreach and buy-in at the beginning, and really emphasizing a lot of planning work and community outreach at work at the outset of the process. How does one counter a state administration which is tollway oriented? And I'm going to say all of our 50 states and our federal government is highway oriented. And it's a process of building this movement from the ground up and really focusing on, it's time for safe, walkable communities where all people can participate. You don't have to have a driver's license to participate, or the ability to pay the highly subsidized but still high rates to take an Uber. When will Chicago to St. Louis be fully operational at 110 miles an hour? Hopefully 90 this year. Very excited about that. And then one of the things we really want the Biden administration to do is focus on, what do you have to do to go 110 miles an hour on tracks shared with 3-mile-long freight trains, which again, I'm going to say we should not have in this country. But the planning work for that stalled under the Trump administrations and under the Ron administrations. We need the Biden administration to ramp that up, and that can be one of their early wins. LA to San Diego, I would say you need to start pushing on the local municipalities and counties and the state to get that planning underway. High-Speed Rail Alliance thinks that there needs to be a mix of private and public projects. We're excited about the ones you've listed: Texas Central, Brightline, Ameristar. I think Ameristar has some really good ideas about how to think differently about the Northeast Corridor market, and certainly with the change in demand that COVID has caused. I really like their ideas about taking the Acela trains off the main trunk line and having one type of train that provides all levels of service very frequently on all of those trains is an exciting idea. So Bill, so that's why we need a network, because high-speed trains will bypass smaller communities. So we need to really amp up the shared use services in conjunction with the high-speed services in order to provide better service to the online communities. And Scott Rogers, how do you foresee structuring service expansions to make business sense for private railroads? Amtrak and other advocates seem to be emphasizing the stick rather than the carrot. And I think we need to find more carrots. And I believe that the key to this is having the optimism to plan for very frequent service at no faster than 90 miles an hour with lightweight trains, and really, really invest in the getting dwell times down, getting trains around turns faster, getting acceleration and deceleration faster, and running frequent service so that you can really amp up your ridership, and then drive down your cost per unit so that you can give the railroads a bigger piece of the puzzle. And also figuring out how to get railroads engaged in 90-mile-an-hour freight trains. We have the technology is proven in the US for doing that already. It's a matter of changing the market perspective of railroads so that they are going for shorter haul intermodal freight running at 90 miles an hour. It's a tricky question. Would love to do some more research on how to make that happen. Chris Chandler sent me an email to remind me about the leadership in Louisiana. Chris Byrne is saying, what about slow zones like Alton to St. Louis? And the slow in Michigan City and on the Pierre Marquette, etc. We need to focus on getting up to 80 miles an hour on the entire thing. That needs to be a high level of activity. I've been frustrated in a lot of the plans for 110 miles an hour. And Green Bay is one of these examples where you've got 110 out in the middle and then a lot of 30 within the urban areas. Let's do 90, 80 or 90 for the entire stretch. So that's all, and one more from Martin Friedrichs. Is there a national construction authority? I'm not sure that's the best idea, but a shared knowledge base like at the American Road Builders Association, at the state highway professionals, and have a strong base of knowledge at the FRA, but have the ability to be innovative, kind of like, there's a couple of examples recently where the CEO was engaged, a franchise operations was about to get engaged in telling a franchise they can't do something, like the focus on dairy products at Sonic. And then he went out and talked to the franchisee, and turned out the franchisee was right. So we need to have the knowledge spread around so that there could be an innovation, but a way for people to talk to each other and spread ideas across. And I would add to that, get people overseas to see what's happening overseas. There are some cases where it makes sense to separate the passengers and the freight. So there's some cases where it makes sense to do both on the same track. And I don't know what we do to get our construction costs down to other countries. There are a couple of people who have blog on that on a regular basis and do research on it. And I will disagree with you, Phil Strebe. Railroads are set up to constantly reduce the size of their physical plant and make money in the process of doing that. And because of that, short haul intermodal does not work. We need to change that somehow so that short haul intermodal does work in conjunction with passenger trains. So now I'm moving over to the chat. We can talk about Union Station more in length next week. And there is a lot of work right now planning on a coordinated system of expanded passenger rail in Northern California that's very exciting. It's getting underway, and it assumes that California high-speed rail gets built and also a new tunnel gets built under the bay. And we talked about mistakes in California. The key is to do the right kind of planning up front and get community buy-in. Not sure I agree on the authority picking the wrong routes, but there's an argument to be made there. Caltrain now has dedicated funding. That's very exciting. Where does the money to buy equipment come from? And that's part of the challenge of where does the funding for passenger rail in general come from. I would argue there's some investments that we've made in military bases in places that maybe we should have done that infrastructure work here. It's just my opinion. Don't want to get other people riled. Let's see. We can talk more about California next week. Excited that people have ideas about that. And yes, running the Empire Builder brings more benefit than cost. And again, this talk again about a national construction authority, it's not the way we've done any other program. So what's happened is the feds have funded state programs or local programs that the infrastructure is owned by the state or a local entity. So this would be the first major construction program by the feds. Not sure about that, but there are some folks who think that's a good idea. Buy America, you know, we need to focus on building an American program for the subparts. I agree, absolutely. And I'm willing to do that at 100% when the people who are arguing for 100% are willing to buy an American-made smartphone. I'm not sure I understand your question about the cost of rolling stock, Phil. And Maurice, I can't go back to that. And I believe, because Kurt Snyder is saying that 30% of high-speed rail was supposed to come from the private sector. I believe that once you get trains running in the valley and in the Silicon Valley, the Central Valley, the high desert, once those trains are running, it becomes much, much easier to talk about private financing for the passes over the mountains. And gas tax hasn't funded the trust fund in 2 decades. We need to totally give up on this fantasy that driving is paid for out of user funds. I want to deal with one last question. Um, so the state of Wisconsin has been working on going from 7 trains a day to 10. The city of Glenview argued against a key component of that proposal and persuaded our governor to not allow that key component to happen. Wisconsin is continuing to move forward with an alternative plan, and they're actually doing a couple of key components of that in the next year at Mitchell Field and at the Milwaukee train station. So we're glad that they're continuing to work on that. My opinion is we should have started talking about a separate dedicated passenger line decades ago, and that's the answer to the problem. If you could separate freight and passenger, there's no reason to hold freight trains in order to wait for commuter or for the passenger trains to get out of the way. So it's time to start doing the design work on creating a high volume freight line parallel to the high volume passenger line. And that's the answer to Chicago to Milwaukee. And that's what you need to do to get better metro service and the hourly service that really should exist on Chicago to Milwaukee. And Greg, the discussion about separating passengers and freight is really not about separating passengers and freight. It's really about separating long, slow, heavy with fast, short, long, slow, heavy with short, fast, light. You need to separate short, fast, light with long, fast, heavy. And there is the potential of running short, fast, light freight at 90 miles an hour. We already know how to do that in this country. At 200 miles an hour, the Italians and Chinese are doing some test markets of that. So that's the real issue. And I think a key part of this, again, is how do you start really amping up and taking freight off the roads in addition to taking passengers out of their cars. So went over, but want to point out a couple of ways you can help. Again, Reed, you're absolutely right. We also need to extend the UP North line from Kenosha to Milwaukee. So I got distracted there. I apologize for that. Where is the share screen button? So a couple of ways you can help. One is, and I am too cluttered, I can't see my screen. So we have a California high-speed rail petition and a federal petition. You can help right now by getting all of your friends to sign those petitions. I want to be clear that that also gets them in our new email service so that we can start building this, 2 friends plus 2 friends plus 2 friends. We are working on a shorter, faster, more exciting version of this that will probably roll out in the next week or so. Get your folks to sign that. That's step number 1. Step number 2, oh, here's the California petition. We've got 1,500 on this. We should have a lot more. Here's the federal petition. My goal has been 10,000. I'm hoping that if we have a shorter, more exciting one that's tied into the local news, we can build that really fast. If you don't want to sign the petition, subscribe to our newsletter, get your friends to subscribe to the newsletter, and most importantly, donate. We really want to amp up. The most important thing we can do is tell the exciting story about what this can do, tell the exciting stories about our successes, and we've had successes. Unfortunately, we've had high-profile failures, but there have been successes, and we can talk about the lessons learned from the failures. That takes money to get that message out there. your membership, by being a member, you will help get that word out. You will be a part of getting that word out. I want to point out here, not join, I'm sorry, get involved, get some swag. We've got face masks, shirts are on the way, not in stock yet, but we ordered them yesterday. Hats, posters. These are great for keeping your tea in, toy trains, keychains, etc. If you want some swag or something to share with a friend, go there. But those are the ways you can help. Most importantly, get the word out, get ready to get engaged very shortly, and make a donation so that we can reach even more people quicker.